Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the College Sports Hive. That is Leif and I am Scott Stevens. We're here to break down all of this tremendous action that took place this weekend over the conference championships. We had some amazing talent hit the field, ton of top 25 matchups that we'll unpack a little bit for you. And with that being said, the final college football playoff rankings were announced this morning. And so that means we have our top four, and that four will be the four that compete in the college football playoff. So we have our national semifinal games locked in for January 1st for New Year's Day. So some tremendous things to look forward to there. We'll offer our opinions, our takes, our thoughts, and on what happened there, who got in, who was left out, and all of that good stuff. So we'll make sure to delve into that in significance. And then also we'll give you some quick bowls that have been announced already that are matchups that have Leif and I very excited both. And then, as always, we'll finish off with how we did this weekend, picks-wise, and all of that good stuff. So we'll keep it a little bit more brief for you this evening, and we'll start off with our Power 5 Conference Championship recaps. The Oregon Ducks won their second Pac-12 title in a row after handing USC their first loss on that Friday night game, 31-24 final. What do you make of Oregon's ability to battle back and win a second straight Pac-12 championship game?
Yeah, that was a really interesting game, and not only the game itself was intriguing, but just the storylines both coming in and after the game. Both teams hadn't looked great, and they're the two biggest programs in the Pac-12, and we're battling out for a New Year's Six spot. And then USC, I guess, had hopes for the playoff. Oregon comes in and played and wins that game from the get-go. They made Keaton Slovis uncomfortable. Kayvon Thibodeau was unbelievable. He was in the backfield every second. But the biggest takeaway for me was, one, Oregon's quarterback that they didn't seem to trust, Tyler Shuck, very much. And two, the fact that they got into this game was enormous, not only to win this year and make the big-time bowl game, but also for the future, because you can send the pitch of, hey, in this year we made a New Year's Six bowl and we weren't at our best. Whereas they weren't even supposed to be in that game. That was supposed to be Washington. Obviously, everything's shortened, and they very well could have won the North in a regular season. But they benefited, and they proved they're a really good football team. But they were benefited by some of these COVID timings for Washington. And I think it'll be huge down the road for Oregon's recruiting, and then hopefully, for their case, building a dynasty, and not so hopefully for the rest of the Pac-12.
Yeah, absolutely. Super interesting in this one. A couple things stood out to me was just the depth of Oregon stood out a little bit. C.J. Verdell did not play in this game, one of Oregon's top running backs. We previewed him heavily, seeing where was he this entire year. I think he has to be dealing with some sort of injury, but he did not play, and so the burden fell on Travis Dye, and he carried the ball well, averaged 5 yards a carry. But really, what stood out to me the most was Oregon's ability to get people that we hadn't even heard of coming into this game involved. They had a quarterback, Anthony Brown, their backup quarterback, came in and was 3 of 4 for 17 yards, but threw 2 touchdowns, and so that was just super interesting to see. It pretty much seemed like anytime there was a money down, a money situation, they actually turned to Anthony Brown instead of Tyler Shuck. So, but then relied on Tyler Shuck to run the ball and convert on some of those things. And then the other one was Sean Dollars, the running back, came in and had 7 carries for 52 yards. Really had a spark about him. He averaged 7.4 yards per carry. And I think you just saw this Oregon team really dig deep a little bit in this one and able to produce some big plays from people that didn't necessarily stand out on the stat sheets beforehand coming into this one. So I just think it's a testament to where that program's kind of heading. And I think you saw a snapshot of what's to come for this team, because I think that could be a potential starting backfield for them moving forward. But I think you hit the biggest point, which is Kayvon Thibodeau and his performances, and not just this Pac-12 championship, but last year's as well. I think he just needs to play like every game as the Pac-12 title, wouldn't you say?
I mean, I'm sure it's hard to get as motivated as it is for that type of a game, but yeah, his 2 best games of his collegiate career, I'd bet a very large margin, by a large margin, and I'd bet that none is even remotely close were in the Pac-12 championships. I mean, every time that seemingly USC was making a run, Thibodeau is in the backfield, whether he got a sack or he hit Slovis, made him throw the ball poorly, caused an interception. He was the best player on the field on either side of the ball for either team. And it has me wondering, is he going to play next year with more and more opt-outs? Like he's a surefire top 10 picks, probably top 5 pick next year. And you're seeing a lot of players opting out. This year with coronavirus, it was more prevalent, but it has me wondering if we're seeing more, if we're going to see more of him, and how good Oregon can be, especially with their recruiting ramping up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's tremendous to kind of see what they're capable of. I'm not sure about Kayvon Thibodeau. I think he definitely has done enough to be able to have a high enough draft stock to go, but I think he can only improve that if he stays and continues to play for the Ducks and really leads that defense once again to potentially even a third straight Pac-12 championship. So a lot to delve into. Keaton Slovis with 3 interceptions in that game, so some issues there with SC on offense. But we'll move along. We're just going to do some quick recaps of these games. We got much more to get to in terms of the playoff rankings and our opinions there. At noon on Saturday, Ohio State really had a battle and dig deep in their game against Northwestern. Northwestern came out and was leading 10-6 at the half, just really shut down the Buckeyes offensively. The Buckeyes entered this game without Chris Olave, an undisclosed injury, so a huge piece on their outside missing, and a huge safety net for Justin Fields, unable to go in this one. So, and with that being said, if that's a potential COVID issue, the Big Ten guidelines would indicate that he would not be able to play in the college football semifinal game, which we'll get to in a little bit. But they were able to come back and beat Northwestern 22-10 and remain undefeated on the year. That feather in the cap moment with winning the Big Ten again. I think this is their 4th straight year winning the Big Ten now. So it's really impressive stuff there with Ryan Day and what he's created there at Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, they just looked really resilient. Northwestern came out and played better than we certainly thought, and better than I just assumed the Buckeyes thought they even could. Defensively, they made Justin Fields look more than mortal, and Fields looked baffled. He didn't have his safety blanket in Olave. They made Garrett Wilson have to beat them as the primary receiver, and the corners for Northwestern seemed more than up to the task, and they also got pressure, which is a recipe that few teams can replicate, of both getting pressure and having elite corners without having to sacrifice pressure for secondary coverage. And they made him look hard. And then the story of the game was Trey Sermon. He was phenomenal. I don't think that the Buckeyes could win this game without him playing the way he did, just because of how well Northwestern came out and played. But yeah, it showed resilience. Ryan Day was uber aggressive yet again, and their defense made enough plays to slow a Northwestern offense that initially started off pretty well.
Yeah, I talked about this a couple times throughout the year so far, but it's one of those another examples of just a really good offense with playmakers that can beat you anytime, and they have depth in that position. Like Trey Sermon technically isn't even their starting running back; it's Master Teague. So Trey Sermon comes in and has just an absolutely massive game. Ran for 331 yards, I believe, was the final total, and so yes, this is just another one of those examples that I've kind of harped on. Is as good of defense as Northwestern played against the passing attack of Ohio State and Justin Fields. A good offense that has all those weapons will eventually find a way to eke out a win against a team that plays the style of offense. I'll say that Northwestern does. They just didn't have enough firepower to kind of hang with the Buckeyes. They had all of the opportunities that they needed to. They just weren't able to really punch in the dagger that really put Ohio State on the edge. Because let's be honest, 10-6 a deficit for Ohio State isn't that daunting for them to come back from. And a 10-6 deficit, if it was flipped, Northwestern down 4 is very scary for that team.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. I mean, the style of Northwestern chooses to play is so contingent on ball dominance and not allowing explosive plays. And Ohio State has all those explosive playmakers that are even non-starters can go for enormous numbers like Trey Sermon did. And it makes them dangerous even when they're not playing their best at even with who's available. So it'll be interesting to see how they bounce back and what playmakers can play for Ohio State in their college football semifinal.
Yes, I agree 100% with you. Oklahoma, Lincoln Riley, and Spencer Rattler and company were able to hold off a late rally, by Iowa State to win the Big 12 once again by a final score of 27-21. What do you make of this Oklahoma team? Because we'll get into it later, but their stock really increased in the eyes of the College Football Playoff Committee.
Yeah, they looked really good. Their defense was swarming, and that's the sentence I didn't think I'd be saying about Oklahoma when I first watched them earlier in the year. They lost to Kansas State, and they were getting ran all over. And now they play a really good Iowa State team led by fringe Heisman contender in Brees Hall. And they really slowed him down, made Brock Purdy have to do a lot and made him uncomfortable. I was super impressed. And their offense was limited by Iowa State's really impressive defense. And they still were found a way to get it done and were efficient in doing so. And if Oklahoma can play defense, they're going to be able to score. So that's a dangerous recipe.
Clemson with another big win, their sixth straight ACC championship win for Dabo Swinney and Clemson. So kudos to them. Tremendous work that they've started and continue to provide throughout the ACC landmark. Notre Dame, this was their first time playing for the ACC title game. They ended up kind of getting dismantled in this game. The final score is only 34-10, but let's be honest, this game was completely out of hand early, and Notre Dame really didn't have a shot at all to score and provide any sort of spark against this Clemson team.
Yeah, I mean, this game wasn't even remotely close, and you got the feeling it would be early, and then they missed that chippy field goal after intercepting Lawrence on the first drive and having scored a field goal of their own. They could be up 10-0. Instead, they settled for a field goal, missed the chippy, and from then on, the game was in hand for Clemson. Trevor Lawrence looked unbelievable, and the Clemson defense played probably their best game of the season. Against a really good offensive line, they were in the backfield, made Ian Book not be able to escape with his legs, like we talked about being a huge factor. And he didn't have the pocket, not necessarily pocket presence, but he just didn't have the arm without the legs. I think he had been contingent on making plays with his legs to make plays with his arms, and Clemson didn't even allow that to be a possibility.
Florida did just about everything that they could in the SEC championship game. The over actually hit on this. It was set at 74, I believe, was the over-under. The final tally was 98, I believe, if my math is correct. So the over hit by a long shot there. Really competitive, close game here. Florida always seemed to find themselves down by like 14, and then they would score and cut it to 7, and then Alabama would score and cut it and bring it back up to 14. So they never really got with it, like to tie the game back up. But Florida really competed in this game and had a chance with an onside kick to potentially go down and tie the game up late. But with that being said, they weren't able to do so, and Alabama was able to win yet another SEC title.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference in this game is Florida went for field goals in the first half, and Alabama was getting touchdowns. They were converting on third down, and I don't know what Florida was thinking when leaving Najee Harris open on 3 straight, pretty much identical little angle routes. And I think it was too tall of a task to come back against Alabama. I knew they'd be able to score points. They just couldn't stop Alabama, and I think that was a recipe a lot of us foresaw.
Huge turning point in this game was when Mac Jones actually threw an interception early, and so Florida had the opportunity to potentially go up 14-7. But on the return, John Mechie had a tremendous tackle, helmet right on the football, knocked just massive hit on the return man out of nowhere. And knocked the ball loose, and Alabama was able to actually recover again. So that was basically just a free first down for them at that point in time. They were able to then again go score, so it's 14-7 in favor of Alabama. So a really tremendous play there by Mechie, keeping his team in it. And just a really fun and we said it was going to be heavy loaded offense, and it provided for sure there in the SEC title game primetime slot. So those are the Power 5 conference championship games. Once again, Oregon wins the Pac-12, Ohio State wins the Big 10, Oklahoma wins the Big 12, Clemson wins the ACC, and Florida wins Alabama wins the SEC. Sorry about that. But we did have some Group of 5 conference championship games. One was canceled due to COVID issues. That was Louisiana versus Coastal Carolina. So we weren't able to see the Chanticleers play in yet another game. Unfortunate for everyone out there. And I was actually excited to see that matchup between those two teams. It was going to be a really good one for both teams. UAB was able to beat We Are Marshall. We were not Marshall in this one, and UAB wins the Conference USA title 22-13. Buffalo also, Ball State handed Buffalo their first loss of the season. And winning the MAC 38-28. So we both got both of those wrong. So unfortunate there.
Yeah, I mean, these games were hard to foresee coming into it because Buffalo had looked really good. Their run game was dominant. That's always a good recipe to win games. And Patterson, their running back, is phenomenal. Credit to Ball State coming out and playing a really good game. And Buffalo had chances at the end of the game to get this game really close and hope for a miracle with an onside kick, and Ball State's DBs made some really nice plays at the end of the game. And also UAB, I hadn't seen them to that point, but I was really impressed by the coaching job of that game. They looked really well schooled and pulled an upset.
San Jose State was able to stay perfect on their year, beating Boise State in the Mountain West Championship game by a score of 34-20. So congrats to the Spartans on a perfect season, the conference championship. Good stuff there. They have a big bowl game coming up that we'll highlight for you. And another opportunity to go against a different conference champion and in the Group of Five scheme and have a real legitimizing win there as well. Cincinnati was able to scrap out an ugly 27-24 win over Tulsa to win the American. This was not at all what that Cincinnati team needed to kind of legitimize themselves in the terms of the College Football Committee. But with that being said, they still did enough to ensure that they are the Group of Five team to play in the New Year's Six Bowl. So congratulations to Luke Fickell and company for Cincinnati, and a huge, tremendous accomplishment. And they're going to have a marquee matchup coming up.
Yeah, I mean, they played Georgia, and that's certainly no slouches at all. But I actually was on ESPN earlier today, and their athletic director gave an interview on ESPN and said basically they won their 9 games. What else could they do? And that left me thinking what you just said is that the game wasn't good enough. Their final game wasn't good enough for them to earn a spot. And I truly believe had they not had COVID issues take away 2 or 3 of their last games prior to this one, and they'd still been undefeated at 11-0 or 12-0, they'd have a very good claim. Just because the way it shook out, I mean, Notre Dame got dismantled. 24 points was generous, and I think that they very easily could have fallen out. And Texas A&M didn't play a championship game, so Cincinnati very easily could have been next. But great season by the Bearcats, and hopefully they got another game in store and continue their perfect season.
Absolutely. That was the Group of Five Conference Championships. Once again, UAB beat Marshall in the Conference USA title, Ball State over Buffalo to win the MAC, San Jose State won the Mountain West, and Cincinnati out of the American. So tremendous job to all these programs, huge wins and any stretch of the imagination to win your conference is always a great thing. With that being said, the college football playoff rankings were released. We do have our top 4 and the 4 teams that are going to play for a national championship game. Those 4 in this order are Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and Notre Dame round out the 4 teams that will have an opportunity to play. So with that being said, Alabama, the 1 seed, will play Notre Dame, the 4 seed. That is in the Citrus Bowl. It's going to be played in Dallas. And then Clemson will play Ohio State in a rematch of a tremendous semifinal last year in the Rose Bowl game, which has been moved to the Superdome in New Orleans in order to allow fans at both of these venues. So some interesting moves in that aspect of things. But what do your first impressions of the committee's decision and these 4 teams go?
I think it was just like, okay, that's what I expected, but I was a little disappointed because I wanted to see Texas A&M or Cincinnati, preferably Cincinnati, because they hadn't lost, have a chance. But this is what I expected to happen because Notre Dame previously was undefeated, but they really didn't look competitive against Clemson. And in my mind, I think it's hard to imagine based off that performance and what it inspires that you believe they're going to be the 4th best team, the most able to compete with Alabama. So, I mean, that's what I thought, but good season by the Irish for sure. I don't mean to dismiss them entirely, and they very well could compete with the Crimson Tide. Yeah,
we don't know exactly what happened with Notre Dame this past yesterday in terms of their performance against Clemson. They just really did not look ready to go at all in this one. I do think we can both kind of say very securely that we definitely agree 1 and 2, Alabama, Clemson being the top 2 teams in that order. Alabama very much deserving of the number 1 team in the country, and then Clemson very much deserving to be the number 2 team in the country, with their only loss coming in a double overtime game over that Notre Dame team, and the fact that Ohio State's only played 6 games. So I agree with the 1, 2, 3 order. And would you say kind of the same?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think this was the winner of the ACC was going to be 2 no matter what, and especially the way Clemson won it. I'm really happy with 1, 2, 3, and I do think they're the 3 best teams in college football.
Yeah. So a couple further questions that I'm going to pose to you, and these are just some of the things that I've heard from other people, some of the things that I've thought about. and just trying to unpack this situation a little bit further, because this is for a national championship and it's one of the bigger ones in the landscape of college sports, and that is football, college football. So you look at exactly what happened this year, and you have the same three teams that we've seen go to the college football playoff pretty much every year, and that is Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State. And not to take anything away from these programs, they're doing everything right. They're recruiting really well. They're winning their games that they need to win, and they've proven that they're legitimate dynasties in the landscape of the sport. But with that being said, Kirk Herbstreit said it on game day. It basically boils down to, if you're outside the fan base of Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State, you're essentially only playing for one playoff spot every year, because you just have to assume that those three are going to make it. And so with that being said, do you think it is time to change the format of the college football playoff to allow more teams into it?
I mean, I think it's complicated from the perspective of the committee in making an 8-team, which is a really popular demand. I'd love it as a fan. There's just more that goes on financially and for all the schools. But I think this was as good of a year to try it as there ever will be, because of all the uncertainty. I mean, we even saw that a conference championship team in Washington didn't get to play their conference championship. So my point being there is that if a team couldn't make it, you might as well have a replacement. And so I think 8-team would have been great this year. But I agree. I think they should move towards that, because more teams will be compelled to go. I think it will be better for your ratings, more money as well if you're the committee. And as a fan, it's just great football to watch. I mean, it really has been 3 programs, and you could give an honorable mention to Georgia and Oklahoma, who've been there a few times themselves. But I mean, it's the same guys. Georgia and Oklahoma are both in the top 8 as well. So if you were to make it there, then you have 5 programs that probably are going to make it, and you have 3 open spots to make it 8 rather than 1 open spot. And the Pac-12 has suffered recently. Oklahoma's had a chance in the past years as a Big 12. But it really boils down to which teams, like runner-ups, can make it, because the Clemson and Alabama and Ohio State are going to get the best recruits. So you're going to have to coach your tail off, get lucky, or both to make it in. And I just frankly think that they have to do it for more teams to be inspired to make it and more fans to be engaged in the playoff, because it is repetitive. I enjoy watching it, but it is repetitive and may lose some audience.
Absolutely. I think what Herbstreit was kind of saying by this is he was just worried about the future of the college football fan, of just basically you're seeing the same thing happen over and over again, and you're kind of losing the flair of what the BCS kind of was all about, and all of that, of all of those things. And I'm not saying the BCS system was perfect in any stretch of the imagination. I'm just saying I think you're able to find a middle ground of where you're opening the playing field to everyone, and not even to mention the group of 5 schools that legitimately can go and have some of their best years of program history ever, and all they get is a high five and say, oh yeah, go play a team that we don't even think is good enough to play for a national championship regardless in a New Year's Six Bowl. So it's kind of just one of those things where they don't even get to prove themselves against what the committee even views as the best of the best. So I think a lot of those schools are feeling a lot of animosity about this whole thing, and I just think there needs to be a way to either move away from such discrepancy in terms of conferences and what makes up a conference, and have your conference championship mean something. And I think that's definitely something that needs to happen in the landscape of college football to keep these people engaged, and because you even saw it with head coach Nick Saban in Alabama. It's just like, I really love just winning the SEC, and in terms of, if you do that, you're probably going to go play for the college football playoff. But if you don't, and you win the American, or God forbid you win the Pac-12 or the Big 12, even in this instance, most of the times you're probably fighting for a chance to go play for it. So I just think there's a lot of unhappy people with the system, and I think there's ways that you could improve it for sure. And so we'll get past that. That's a whole different issue. But let's dive into the 6 teams again, because 5 and 6 just outside were Texas A&M and Oklahoma. What do you think the committee saw to slide in Notre Dame into that 4 spot and leave out mainly Texas A&M, but also Oklahoma, who they clearly view as very legit.
I think what they have to see is Notre Dame is a brand. I mean, I'm not saying that's the only reason, but I think it's easier to eliminate teams like Cincinnati and Coastal Carolina, who were undefeated and played fewer games than Notre Dame did while being undefeated. Notre Dame played in the ACC this year, which really helped them. I think if they'd played an independent, they wouldn't have made it. But I think what the reason they prioritize putting Notre Dame is because they beat Clemson. That's plain as simple as that. And Texas A&M had a really good strength of schedule just by virtue of playing in the SEC, but they didn't beat Alabama. That was their test. They beat Florida, and that's a really good win. But I think the committee valued the Clemson win by the Irish more so than Texas A&M's win over Florida was valued, because they got beaten pretty handily by Alabama. And honestly, I don't see that as a bad loss. As for Oklahoma, I didn't think they really had a great chance to make it at all, even winning their conference, just because their losses were pretty bad. They lost to an Iowa State team that's good, and that didn't matter. But the Kansas State loss, I think, was pretty much that one eliminated them effectively from the start. And the fact that they made it all the way up to number 6 was a testament to Lincoln Riley and Spencer Rattler's growth. But I think they just saw that the loss versus Florida, the loss versus Alabama versus the win against Florida versus a win over Clemson, even without Trevor Lawrence, they just viewed that as more important. And then it's hard to eliminate a brand that could bring you money. I mean, I don't want to say they're corrupt or anything, but it's hard to eliminate a team like Notre Dame with the brand value that they have.
Yeah, I think one of the points you brought up was really important, because you look at the 2 losses for both teams, and Texas A&M lost to Alabama by 28, and Clemson, that was in week 2 of the season, and Clemson lost to Notre Dame lost to Clemson in that championship game by 24. So I think it's telling that they're definitely viewing that as less not embarrassing, but a better loss than the loss to Alabama for Texas A&M. So another thing I want to run by you just real quick is, do you think there was any not like issue, but any laying off, any like stepping off of the throttle in terms of that Clemson win over North Carolina? Because let's be honest, I do believe Clemson could have put up at least 50, maybe even 60 points in this game over Notre Dame in the ACC championship game. It was that one-sided. Travis Etienne barely played in the fourth quarter. So you look at things like this, and do you kind of – because you can draw that conclusion of, Clemson would rather play a Notre Dame team that they are clearly beating handily than a Texas A&M team, and have that ACC brand of 2 teams in the playoff instead of 2 SEC teams.
I don't know if that's the rationale behind Etienne and Lawrence. Lawrence played it out, but they didn't really try to score points, like you said. I love conspiracies. I'm all for havoc in these type of things. So yes, I like to think about it, but I don't think that was really their rationale. I think they wanted to stay healthy. There is something to be said, and I almost think that they think that Notre Dame would pose a better threat, and maybe it's the ACC brand loyalty. And if they were to have pulled off the throttle for that, I almost think that they want to believe that Alabama would have more trouble with Notre Dame than they would with Texas A&M. And maybe that was what it was for, because they knew that Alabama – I guess at that point they didn't know Alabama was going to be the 1 seed, but I think they would have kind of – Dabo said he's not afraid of anyone. So I think maybe if there were a rationale behind laying off the throttle other than resting their players, I think that might be it. I love conspiracies though, so I'm happy with it, and I think I agree with you though. I think this easily could have been like a 55 to 10 win. Like it was nowhere near close. There was actually this one point in the game where Trevor Lawrence stepped up in the pocket and he looked around and was like, "Oh, should I run? No, I'll just dump it off." And it was like he just grinned while throwing. I was like, "Okay, yeah, this guy knows it's in hand even early in the game." So. Yeah, no, I don't know what the rationale was, but good for Clemson revenging their loss, and I'm curious to see what people come up with, both in Twitter and if ESPN talks about it too, because it definitely was brought up.
Yeah, it's just one of those things you can't like you look at it and you're just like, oh, you can't like avoid that conversation eventually happening just because it was almost blatant the way they were trying to not score late in that game. And I do think if Clemson were to have laid the wood on them and won 55 to or 60-10, Notre Dame is not in the situation that they're in right now, going to play for a national championship game. So I do think the committee definitely had to view Notre Dame's lack of success in these big games in recent years as well. For example, when they played Alabama in a national championship game, and certain things like this, some semifinal performances that have not been particularly good. I do believe that kind of played into this, but I do think when you break it down, the four best teams in the country are still going to go and play for the college football playoff. And when you think about it that way as a fan, it makes me very happy. But for some reason, I was just sitting back this entire year, just waiting for someone else to kind of come and emerge themselves as a legitimate contender. And I do feel kind of bad for Texas A&M because all they did was win down the stretch, and all they did was sit at number 5 in the polls. So some interesting takes there. Any final thoughts before we move on from the playoff rankings?
Yeah, I had one thought that came to me while you brought up their history in big games, and is I wonder if that actually factors in, because it factors into our memories and our conception of it. Because I mean, they lost 38-3 to Clemson in 2018 semifinal, I believe, and I don't remember I think it was 2012 they played Alabama in the national championship game, and they lost 42-3 or something like that, and that factors into us. But I don't know if you can like hold that against a Notre Dame team for the fans who like myself want some havoc in the committee, making some changes like you. I don't know if the committee can factor past teams and past programs' histories into it. So that may be an explanation as to why it was just this year's performance and how they've done in big games. But it does concern me going forward that it is the same 6 teams every year pretty much that really compete for it. So I mean, that's it, but I just wanted to give a little rationale for it, and
Yeah.
that they made their championship game, however fair that is.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I agree with you for sure. The good news is with all of this, there are just so much. There's such a huge display of talent in this year's in teams and things like that, and we will get to see some of these teams play one final game in big bowl games that really can provide sparks to their program. New Year's Six bowls are always one of those things that you strive for, as a program as well. And with that being said, we have a list here of tremendous bowl games that we want to talk about just really quickly before we get into the pick results for you and then wrap up this evening's episode. But let's talk first about some of these bowl games. Just real quick, your thoughts on some of these. UCF taking on BYU in the Boca Raton Bowl.
It should be high scoring, and I'm curious to see which quarterback plays better between Dylan Gabriel and Zach Wilson. I'm excited to see that QB matchup in particular, and see if BYU can return their swagger. They seemed a little depleted after their loss to Coastal Carolina, and I want to see Zach Wilson presumably end his college career nicely.
Yeah, it's going to be a great one there for sure. Ball State, conference champion in the MAC, taking on San Jose State. I talked about they had a really good matchup after going undefeated and winning the Mountain West. These two conference champions will meet in the Arizona Bowl.
I mean, I think San Jose's defense was phenomenal against Boise State, and I saw them play San Diego State and limit them to 6 points as well. So that's no fluke, and I'm very curious to see how they limit the mobility of Ball State's quarterback, and it'll be interesting, and it really hopefully starts into becoming not a dynasty, but a real brand name in college football from a Group of 5 school. Like Boise State had all those years where everyone was like, oh, Boise State, and everyone in the country knew that who followed college football. And I'm hoping that one of these teams, or if not both, can become that, because it has become repetitive, and I want to see some smaller schools get representation in these type of and polls year round and preseason polls to come.
Oregon, the conference champion of the Pac-12, will take on Iowa State, the runner-up of the Big 12 in the Fiesta Bowl. What do you make of this matchup? I think this is a really fun one.
Yeah, this one fascinates me, because what Oregon team are we going to see? The team that lost to some frankly bad teams in the Pac-12, or the one that came out and made Keaton Slovis, a really good quarterback, look really baffled at times. How well does the Oregon team move the ball without help of turnovers, or can they force all these turnovers? And And as for Iowa State, I think it's a really good coaching matchup. I think Matt Campbell and I forget Mario Cristobal. That's a really fascinating coordinator and head coach matchup, and some smash mouth football I expect to be played in this one. And I'm happy that we got to see two conference champions in that type of matchup, regardless of. I mean, Iowa State lost, but they were a really good team, and I'm happy to see them match up with a team that finished in a really high fashion, and they weren't punished too badly for a close loss to Oklahoma.
Texas A&M, the first one out of in the committee's rankings, will take on North Carolina in the Orange Bowl. New Year's Six for both these teams. North Carolina is essentially the third place team in the ACC, with both Notre Dame and Clemson going to the playoff. What do you make of this matchup?
This one fascinated me. I thought that Texas A&M might get a higher drawing in terms of seed wise as the five rank, the first one out of the playoff. I wondered if they'd get Florida, perhaps. I know that's SEC, or even if they'd play Oklahoma, who is sixth. But North Carolina is going to put up points, and I think Texas A&M puts up a lot of points and plays good defense as well. So I expect to shoot out, and I think it's a fun, intriguing matchup, and it's an interesting quarterback matchup between Sam Howell and Kellen Mond.
You mentioned Florida; they are taking on Oklahoma in the Music City Bowl. What do you make of this matchup for both of these teams?
That's my favorite matchup of all the bowls that I've seen released so far. I just think that there's going to be some great offense in this game, and it's going to be very interesting to see how these teams play with a lot of NFL talent, who's going to play, and how motivated they are, because they're both on the doorstep. In these type of games, it often comes down to who plays harder, and who's less dejected by not making the playoff. And I hope, for the sake of us as fans and both these teams, that they give each other their best shots and play a great game, because on paper, to me, this is a dream matchup. Just a lot of offense and some really talented players on both sides of the ball.
Oklahoma State is going to take on Miami in the Cheez-It Bowl in this year. What do you make of this matchup? Oklahoma State wasn't able to really piece it all together at the end, and Miami's coming off a terrible loss to North Carolina.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm curious to see who comes and has a rebound and hopefully builds onto it for next year, because both programs looked like they were. I mean, Oklahoma State's been really good for a while under Gundy, and Manny Diaz has his Miami team looking good, but they came off such a horrible loss. I'm curious to see who can come and bounce back more effectively. And no Chuba Hubbard in this game, so I'm curious to see this one. This one doesn't have the name value as some of the others, the matchups, namely the Florida and Oklahoma matchup from the same states, but it'll be an interesting clash of styles as well. And hopefully Derek King has a nice send-off from college football.
A game we actually previewed early on in the year and didn't happen was Liberty versus Coastal Carolina. It is a matchup that they created in the FBC Mortgage Cure Bowl. What do you make? Some of these bowl games, they just get completely out of hand sometimes. What do you make of this matchup between Liberty and Coastal Carolina? A really good matchup for both these schools, I believe.
I'm actually really happy we got to see this one out. I was really looking forward to watching. I mean, game day did happen, and BYU and Coastal Carolina happened, but I was really intrigued by the way we previewed that one. We looked into it, and I thought this was a great matchup on paper, and I look forward to it coming into fruition. More just from satisfying the research we did putting in, and then I convinced myself into it being a great game, and I sure hope it is.
Yeah, and these bowl games are still being announced. There's a lot of teams that are announcing they're not going to play in some of these bowl games. For example, USC, Penn State, Utah, a few other schools that are slipping my mind at this current moment. But teams that were on the bound and potentially had a chance to go play for some of these bowl games are choosing to not go play. What do you make of that decision for these programs? And do you think that is intriguing, or do you think it's kind of the right move?
I personally think it's the right move, and I love college football, but I think I said it in the text to you. I think that the fact that the USC Trojans, who are such a powerhouse name brand, aren't going to play a bowl game after a 5-1 season is indicative of where the world is at, and it's realistic. I think a lot of people in this instance, where it's not a national championship they're playing for, and it's more of a consolation prize, unless it's a dream type of situation, that people shouldn't be traveling, risking their players' health and all these people situating to make these bowls if they don't have to, or if it doesn't present ideal opportunities in your eyes. and it's dangerous right now. So I personally think they made the right decision, and a lot of the Pac-12 and Western schools are opting out, and I'm for the decision, even though I really enjoy Pac-12 football. Most of the teams aren't playing, and I support that decision.
I definitely support it as well. I see where they're coming from, and I also see the people that are viewing it as strange and different. But I just think there's too much at risk to really put those kids into some of those situations where they're potentially not in a safe situation, traveling to hot spots around the country, and things like that of where COVID-19 is spiking, and things like that, just to go play what yet another football game for your program. I do believe some of these schools are making a very, very good decision in this. With that being said, those are the bowl games that we have seen so far that really inspire us. With that, we will include some of these. We'll let you know about some of the matchups that happen and get scheduled, that because I'm sure this is going to fluctuate on where some of these things happen, B, teams that play, COVID issues, all of these things. It's been affluent throughout the year, so I'm sure things will change. So we'll keep you updated on all of that. And also, once these games start to get closer and closer, we might do some individual previews for some that really start to pique our interest, just because it's really hard to start planning and previewing some of these big time matchups that are 6-7 days away, and end up your best player is not playing because he doesn't want to go because he wants to go to the NFL. So we're going to wait to make sure we have all the possible news that we can, and might be a little bit more individual based previews for bowl games that really speak to us. With that being said, we have pick results from last week. I was down one coming into play. I needed two. I picked two different from Leif, and my boys, both Oregon and San Jose State, came through for me. So I went 7-3 this week to improve to 46-26 overall. Leif was 40-22, went 5-5, 45-27. So he finds himself down a game going into bowl season. What do you make of that? As a smile breaks onto your face.
I think I've got a strategy. I can't be changing ones on the document. If you fans want to check this, last time Scott was like, "Oh, as he's typing on the document." Well, I changed two right picks, and I am kicking myself a little bit. Namely, the Oklahoma one. I was like, I'm going to differ from him. I feel good about this. And his argument for, while we were previewing, I could see it, and I could see on the document that he had Iowa State. And then I was like, well, I'm winning. I might as well go the same way. Won't happen again. I'm going with my own picks here. And it was a well done week. And honestly, I was surprised by some of these games. I thought that Oregon's quarterback play, in my eyes, I've said it all year, has been awful, and it wasn't good again. And they really played a phenomenal defensive game. So credit to Oregon there. That one I was close to picking. I'm happy for you. You got some big wins there, but I'm annoyed at myself at the same time. And big time players make big time shots. I'm gonna hit some clutch ones coming up in the bowl games.
Oh, I can't wait. I'm just gonna go the exact same pick that you do every single time. That way I hold serve unless you flip flop on me. But no. Yeah, it's been super fun all year, making sure we're keeping track of where we're at in our wins and losses, and hopefully you all have enjoyed it as well. So with that being said, that's going to wrap up our recap here this evening. We wanted to keep it a little bit more brief, since our last couple have definitely stretched the time frames that we've been setting for ourselves. So back to basics a little bit here with just a standard recap of great football, and we'll be back with you early this week to preview some great basketball, as I'm sure it's another great docket of games that Leaf will have for us to get delving into. So with that being said, we will see you all early this upcoming week. Stay safe, everyone. Take care. And once again, that's Leaf. I'm Scott. See y'all.
Hasta luego.